You're listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, today featuring Donovan Brown discussing how to use Azure DevOps services.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to another episode of the Azure DevOps Podcast. Go online to azuredevops.show to see the other episodes we've had so far. I'm really excited to speak with today's guest, Donovan Brown. Donovan is a Principle DevOps Manager at Microsoft, helping developers do great things with DevOps methods on the Microsoft platform. Donovan, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, happy to speak to you. So it's been a wild ride since the launch of Azure DevOps a few weeks ago. How has it been for you?
Wild is a good way of describing it, right? It's obviously there's a lot of work that goes into having a big launch like that. A lot of rehearsals, a lot of back and forth, a lot of late nights. But I think it all came together really well. We're excited. I think aligning what used to be VSTS closer to Azure is just a good move for everyone, not only for Microsoft, but for our customers of Microsoft as well. Kind of aligning it to be, this should be your default answer for trying to get into Azure.
Yeah, I can just imagine all the teams and all the work that has to go on with a product that massive and that's been around for that long.
Yeah, exactly. And renaming anything is difficult. Renaming something that's now on its third name is even harder.
Yes.
Because it's been VSO and services and VSTS and now it's Azure DevOps. And I think it's probably the most appropriate name we've had for it so far. So hopefully people will start to understand what it actually does. The only thing that I was concerned with the name is that I hope people don't lose sight of the fact that even though it's called Azure DevOps, you can still deploy to your on-prem assets with it. You can still deploy behind your firewall, onto your mobile devices, all your Docker workloads, right? The name might have changed, but the power has stayed the same. So don't think that we've in any way limited it to only work with Azure. That power works everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. There's some customers that we have that have really, I would say, intricate firewall setups, and just putting the what was called the VSTS build agent on the right machine in the right network segment has allowed all kinds of on-premise scenarios.
Correct, exactly. And it's really interesting because you don't have to punch a firewall hole into your org, right? We just need to make sure that the agent can see out, which is usually a little bit easier, but we do have some people who lock down traffic in all directions, right? And that becomes a little bit of a challenge. But as long as you allow the agent to see out, we can do magical things for you in either side of your firewall, in your DMZ, behind your firewall, on your on-prem assets. It's just a really powerful tool set that I think a lot of people struggle with, because even when it was called VSTS, they thought, oh, okay, this was only for the cloud stuff. Like, no, don't let the name fool you. Like, we can deploy anywhere. And I get on stage all the time and I say any language, any platform. And I just say it over and over again until someone believes me. And I prove it over and over again. I can't remember the last time I did a .NET demo. Not because I don't love .NET. I code in it all the time, but I'm trying to do Node and Java and all these other languages to prove to our customers and our non-customers even more so that you need to take a hard look at what we're doing here, because we understand how to deploy Java. We understand how to deploy Node. We can build your Docker containers and deploy them anywhere you want in the world. Like, you need to start looking at Microsoft with a completely fresh pair of eyes, right? You need to let go of all what you used to know about Microsoft, because I like to say it on stage all the time. This is not your daddy's Microsoft, right? This is a completely new developer-led Microsoft. With Satya being a developer, it's kind of changed our whole flow, and our culture here has been drastically changed because we're now run by a developer again, which is fantastic.
That's awesome. So for folks that maybe don't know a whole lot about you, can you share what you do day to day at Microsoft?
Oh, wow. Day to day, it's I do a lot of programming, which I love. Right, I'm 20-year developer. I've been writing software since the mid '90s. I started at Compaq Computers. And at that time, I was already on Windows. I was already a Microsoft person, but I didn't work for Microsoft, which is kind of neat now that I actually work closely with the team that wrote my first compiler, which is kind of surreal sometimes when you realize that. So what I do on a day-to-day basis is prepare for conferences. My team that I run here at Microsoft, when I'm telling laymen what we do, I'm like, we're public speakers. That's the easiest way to sum up what we do for a living, right? We go to conferences, we go to meetups, we go to user groups, we go to customers, and we basically are out there advocating, this is why you need to look at Microsoft. What we're doing is awesome. But we're all technical, right? So we're not just public speakers. We all come from technical backgrounds. I have a person who's a Linux expert who knows Kubernetes and Helm and Brigade and all this nice containerized workloads. I have another expert who knows VSTS inside and out and can write extensions and do all this crazy stuff. I'm a 20-year dev with a big VSTS background. So we're not just out there preaching the words of someone else trying to make you believe. We're developers who do this, or engineers who do this every day. And we just seem to love what we're doing and luckily are decent at talking in public about it. And so on a daily basis, we're preparing documentation, we're preparing our demos, we're writing software. I have 2 open source projects that I maintain. One of them is called VS Team, which is a PowerShell wrapper of the REST API that supports what is now called Azure DevOps. So I'm on that a lot because I have a lot of pull requests coming in, which is fantastic. So the community has jumped on board. I'm constantly getting pull requests for new wrappings. I also have another project called Yo Team, which allows you to stand up an entire pipeline from dev, QA, and prod for Node.js, Java, .NET, and .NET Core in about 4 minutes. So you go from absolutely nothing, a completely empty Azure account with just an empty VSTS to an entire pipeline in any of those 4 languages. So I'm constantly working on that too. I just added PowerShell support to it. So if you want to write a PowerShell module and deploy it all the way out into the PowerShell gallery, you can now just type Yo Team and answer a few questions, and I'll give you the skeleton project, the skeleton build, and the skeleton release. That'll take you all the way into the PowerShell gallery. So my day is a lot of programming, a lot of preparing for speaking at conferences. Like the launch, for example, that we just had for Azure DevOps. That's a lot of time. People think we just get up there and give those demos and we just talk to each other. That's not the case. There's weeks and weeks and weeks of work and preparation and rehearsals and demo preps and back and forth with marketing and the engineering team just to prepare to get on stage for an hour, right? It's just unbelievable. So our days they're pretty active, right? Of a whole collection of things. It's not just one thing, and every day is not the same, right? One day I wake up and I have 4 pull requests I have to go review, and it takes me all day to do it. Some days I wake up and I realize, oh my gosh, I have to keynote Ignite in 2 weeks. I got to start preparing my demos for that. Right. And then I'll spend several weeks getting ready for demos. So it's an exciting job, though. I'm really enjoying it. I get to meet a lot of our customers all over the world. It's a global job, which is really interesting. So I'll be in Poland here not too long from now. I've been in Europe probably 4 times already, South America twice this year, all speaking at conferences and to our customers. So it's but don't make it mistake, because I think it looks a lot more glamorous on Twitter than it actually is. Being on those planes like that it's a tough job, but it's a lot of miles. Job. Oh man, I reached 1K by April, right? So like in 3 months, I had flown over 100,000 miles in 2018 already. So it was it's a lot of hard work, but it's rewarding work too. When you see the customers just light up, when you realize that you've reached someone who, I remember it was pretty interesting. I went to a meetup and I spoke, and the guy came up to me afterwards and said, "I hated Microsoft until you finished speaking." Right? And now I have to go look at you guys again. It's like, I had no idea you could do that with Java. I was like, wow, I could never had someone just come up and be that brutally honest with me. It's like, I hated your company an hour ago, and now I want to go and learn more about what Microsoft is doing. It's like, wow, I'm glad I'm here, right? Even if I just reach one person at every location to that level of impact, right? It's like, okay, this was worth it.
That's huge. Yeah, and Microsoft's had huge phases from the 90s through the 2000s, and now it's 2018, and huge shifts. It's a very different Microsoft than it was in the 90s, or even than it was under in the 2000s.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I've always seen Microsoft until I joined from the outside looking in, right? And you only know so much when you're on the outside of a company like Microsoft. And then when I joined Microsoft, I joined in December of 2013. Satya took over February of 2014. So as far as I know, this is the only Microsoft I've ever worked for, is a Satya-led Microsoft, a Microsoft who's number one in open source contributions, a Microsoft who open sources .NET and open sources Visual Studio Code, a cloud-based platform Microsoft. It's the only Microsoft I've ever actually worked for. So it's kind of cool because I don't have a lot of that. I wouldn't want to call it baggage, but some of that history can sometimes be a weight that you're carrying, right? Almost that you used to be hated so much. But for me, it's like I'm working for the cool Microsoft, right? I'm working for the open, fun Microsoft. So it's been an amazing experience for me.
Right. Well, I 1997 is when I started with Microsoft, and it's been a good ride. I mean, there was some rough years. The Ruby on Rails movement. That right there. The message was, oh yeah, get off of Microsoft. You need to come to Rails. And now we look at the percentages left and like, shoosh, I'm glad I didn't make that investment.
Yeah, it's crazy because my manager, Chad Fowler, was huge in the Ruby community. So he's my new manager for about a couple of months now. It's kind of funny to hear you say that. So I can get you some backdoor interviews if you want to with the guy who helped build Ruby on Rails, and now he's here at Microsoft too. So I think that kind of tells you everything too, right?
Well, it has some great capabilities, but for any platform, I mean, you have people. It takes a lot of effort to learn particular technologies, and you need to know that it's going to have a long runway because it's your career.
Yeah, yeah. But what's interesting is that we've all had to change languages, though, right? If you've been in this industry since the 90s, you do not program in the same language you programmed in then. I can't imagine that you do. I started as a C++ programmer, right? Yeah. And now I do. It's funny enough, I do more PowerShell and Node.js today than I do any other language, which is really odd. But there was a period where I was exclusively C#. I started off at C++, and now I do Node.js and PowerShell or JavaScript, rather to be more. Node.js is not a language, but I do JavaScript and PowerShell almost every day.
Right,
it's crazy.
So maybe we can talk about how, I guess, Team Foundation system has morphed through the phases to Azure DevOps, because it really started out as just for .NET. I mean, the build system that originally came out was a XAML configuration tool, and it's so different when now you have Mac build agents and Linux build agents, and you can build any type of software.
Back when it was actually Team System, it was actually MS Build based build systems first. Remember?
Yes.
Like the first build did not have XAML in it. It was just MS Build, and I remember distinctly because I mastered MS Build the day they decided to go with XAML builds. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I just mastered MS Build, and now you're switching it to this Windows workflow. You're killing me. So I had to learn Windows workflow. And when I finally mastered that, they're like, okay, we're switching it again. I'm like, you're killing me, right? Every time I learn a freaking DSL for your builds, you switch it on me. Now I think we finally found it to where this task-based system, hopefully, I just can't imagine us changing it anytime soon. It's really, really good, really, really flexible. But you're absolutely right. I don't know that I would agree that it was only for .NET, but it was really easy for .NET, even from day one, right? Because I remember going into Java shops back in 2006 when I joined Notion Solutions as a consultant for TFS, and I was getting them to build Java builds. You just had to know where in your MS Build script, right, to go and change it. And then same thing when we went to XAML builds. I literally could build anything with the XAML build. I just had to know where to go inside the middle. There was this one little area where it said build. You'd put a switch statement in there, and I could switch on whatever the extension of the project was and build you .NET, build you Java, build you whatever you needed to. But it literally took a consultant to go in and make those tools build anything other than .NET, which is why we have that perception of it only works for .NET on Windows. Like, that's never really true. I mean, it would have been able to build anything at every stage of its life, but it was so difficult, you wouldn't want to spend the money to hire a consultant to go make it do that. Right. Today, to your point, in the actual build system are tasks to build mobile apps, right? For Xamarin or Android or iOS, there's tasks in there to go build Java with Maven or Gradle or Ant, or like literally they're first class citizens. And we have agents that run on Mac, Windows, and Linux, and they're hosted for you, right? So I remember when I was at Compaq, building a CI system was a pain in the butt, right? Getting the machine on the network, getting all the tools on there, learning how to create a make file. It was just like, this was like weeks worth of work to set up a CI system. And now it's a checkbox.
Right.
Now you click a checkbox, and now you have continuous integration on any platform that you want for any language that you want. It's just, it's amazing. It makes me feel old to remember that I was there when CI was hard, and now CI is nothing. And now it's just amazing what we're able to do, because now you get to focus on what you want to do, which is add value. The features you want to add, not the platform that you're going to use to deploy it, not the tool chain you're going to use to deploy it. That stuff just works now. You focus on adding value, which is what we're trying to do here at Microsoft.
Well, speaking of old, Stack Overflow's 2008 developer survey, they have a full 55% of professional developers have 8 or fewer years of experience. 34% have 5 or fewer.
Wow.
And so if you are 18 years or more in the industry, you're in the top 10% of experience in the entire industry. So speaking of that, knowing where it's come for these developers, more than half of them who have less than 8 years in, they can start using Azure DevOps. What are the key things that they need to put into the various pieces, the continuous integration build, the deployment? What concepts should they think of? Because our customers, a lot of them have maybe 2 automated tests, for instance.
Gotcha. Well, whenever I'm helping someone make that transformation or start that journey to a DevOps transformation, I tell them to focus on what hurts most. And that answer is different for every single customer. I don't know what part of your deployment is the most painful, the most risky, or the slowest. You need to be able to tell me that. What I like about having that discussion with our customers is the Azure DevOps offering is so vast that no matter what the problem is, we have something that can help you fix that particular problem. And another thing that I like about the fact that you can now take what parts of it you want and don't want. You can leave behind, hey, I'm in GitHub, I'm using issues, I don't need work item tracking, and I have source control. All I need is your pipelines. Can you please just give me a CI and a CD system? And the answer is now yes. And you don't even have to see the navigation for the features that you aren't going to use, because sometimes it can be distracting. It can make the navigation a little bit trickier because you're having to not look at stuff that you don't really care about, but now you only see what's important to you, which is really powerful. But to answer your original question is, what should someone think about is like what hurts the most? Is it where your source control? Is it your source control branching strategy? Is it how you're managing issues? Because everything isn't always an issue. Sometimes there's bugs and features, and is the tagging getting out of control? And would it be better for you to actually have individual items that say, I am a bug? Like there's no tags necessary. I am a bug, and I have these attributes as a bug that say, give me the steps to reproduce, and these are the expected results, which are different than just having this free form field that I have to fill in, and every bug description is now different, right? And every feature request is now different because you're basically just giving me this blank text box to go fill in. And sometimes that works great. And if you've been in an open source culture your entire life and been using Git issues, you probably have a fantastic system that works, and you can keep using that. If you're brand new and you want to have a little bit more structure around how your work is planned and tracked and categorized, then you can actually use our boards feature that will allow you to have that flexibility. But what's really nice is that you get to pick and choose which portions of the offering that you want to use. You don't have to use it all. You can use just as much as that you want. But again, focus on what hurts most and fix just that one thing. A lot of people, I'll go off and I'll give a DevOps demonstration, and they're like, okay, we got to go back to work and get permission to stop working for 3 months while we go build out all that stuff we just saw Donovan do. I'm like, no, that's not how you do it. First of all, no one's going to give you permission to stop adding value for 3 months. And God forbid that you get that permission and then you fail, right? Because you tried to build something that you've never done before and you have no idea what you don't know yet. So just do me a favor. Go back to work. Find out what part of your pipeline hurts the most. And let's focus our energy 15 minutes a day. Like, no one's going to fault you for that. Trying to figure out how you solve that one bottleneck. And that's going to give you huge increases in your velocity immediately. And then what you're going to do is realize that now that we've solved this problem, what is the slowest thing now? Oh, it's this thing over here. Great. Let's go try to solve that problem today and see what is the next slowest thing in our pipeline. You just keep rinsing and repeating that. So eventually you're going to have this really highly efficient pipeline, but you didn't have to stop what you were doing. You were continuously delivering value. You were still hitting your sprint goals. You were just making an incremental investment in your pipeline that eventually will start to yield great value. And I think much more than if you were to stop what you're doing and on your hypothesis, like you're dreaming up what you think this pipeline's supposed to do, and you build it, and then you realize the first time you try to use it, it doesn't work the way that you thought it was going to.
Yeah. You mentioned using as much or as little as you need. A lot of customers, they track their work in some place. Their source control is maybe, it could be on GitHub or it could be somewhere else. There's a lot of changes with Azure DevOps services where you can pick and choose now, right?
Correct. Right. So, for example, the main pillars are pipelines, board, repos, packages, where you can do like your storing your packages and versioning, and then test. And not everybody needs all of that, or they've already aligned behind a particular product that solves that particular problem for them, and they don't need that in their navigation or even confusing someone. Let's say, for example, I'm new to the team and I go to Azure DevOps and I see this test hub, so I assume that's where we do tests, but you have a whole nother product for tests that I'm not aware of yet. And then here I am creating my test plan where I'm not supposed to. But now what you can do is you can simply hide that feature altogether so that a new developer doesn't stumble across a feature that's built into Azure DevOps that isn't being used by that particular organization. And then it'll be like, oh, where do I do my test? Oh, glad you asked. You do it over here because for whatever legacy reasons we use this system. So I think it's really nice that we're allowing them to streamline their user interface to only display the features that the customer is actually using. But you can easily turn them on with a checkbox, which is also nice, because as your team matures or as it grows, maybe you need more of that functionality that you didn't need at day zero. But now I really need to be able to start managing my test cases in a more structured way, or I need to be able to manage my work right here next to my repo and next to my builds. Let's go ahead and turn on that feature now, and people won't be overwhelmed by everything you can do at day zero. And now they can start integrating that into their workflow as well.
Right. And with that, we'll pause for a word from our sponsor.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
And we're back. So there's also some new capabilities around GitHub integration, I understand.
Absolutely. So we've had decent GitHub integration in the past, but what we're trying to do now is make sure that we double down on our commitment to open source. So for example, if you are an open source project and we have public project support now, you can actually have 10 concurrent pipelines, which if you're not open source or you're not a public project, you only get one. So we're trying to make sure that we're making it very seamless. For the GitHub integrations, we now have a plugin inside of their marketplace that you can install that will give you a really nice, easy way to start using our CI/CD system to build your projects that are in GitHub. So there's been a really nice collaborative work going on to make sure that if you're in GitHub and you need a first-class CI/CD system, getting to VSTS, or what now is called Azure DevOps, is going to be a really nice and effortless move for you. It's not okay, how do I wire this stuff up and where do I go get all my tokens to authenticate? Nope. Just install the extension and let us go ahead and start building your code for you. And again, we can build it on Mac, Windows, or Linux, wherever you want.
Awesome. Wow, that's gonna make it so easy for some developers who really don't know, well, the first step, how to put together a continuous integration build if the system can guess what the right steps might be.
Correct. Yeah, because we can look at your repository and through some heuristics determine like, okay, that looks like I see a package.json, this is probably a Node application, or I see a POM file, so this is probably a Java application. I see an SLN, so this is clearly something I can build with Visual Studio. We can start to get some good idea of, based on the anatomy of your repository, on what build we need to go ahead and spin up for you, which is going to be nice. Another thing I think is going to be really nice, and I keep harping on this because I think it's such a huge feature, is having access to all three build platforms. What I mean by that is Linux, Mac, and Windows. You'll see repo after repo after repo that has two different YAML files in it. One YAML for one product that runs on Windows and a YAML for another product that runs on Mac and Linux, right? And now here they are maintaining two different YAML files because they need to build on all three platforms. But when you use Azure DevOps, the pipelines feature, you can use the exact same YAML file to build on Mac, Windows, or Linux. You no longer have to maintain multiple files to reach all the different build platforms.
Talk about that, because some people out there might have heard YAML. What the heck is that?
YAML is a scaled down version of JSON that basically allows you to define textually what you want your build to actually execute. What's nice about that is it is now committed to your repository just like the rest of your source control. So when you commit a change to your build definition, it's not you going into a user interface and dragging around tasks or trying to figure out how to manipulate this UI. It's like, here are the steps clearly in text that I can easily read. I want to add a step, remove a step, or modify a step. I do so, and then I commit that change into the repository like I would any other change to my system, which means now it can go through a pull request workflow. It can be reviewed by your peers before it gets acted on, and then when you deploy it, the build automatically picks up the differences. I remember when I first heard about YAML builds, I wasn't that enamored with them. Like, whatever, why do I need this, right? I like the UI. It's very clear what's being done here. Why do I care about this YAML build stuff? And then it hit me why I needed it, because I was working on a team where our pull request said your build has to succeed before your pull request can get merged into master. Well, the changes that I made to my project required us to change the build definition. Otherwise, my build would never, ever succeed. So now I saw the problem. I can't check in my code because it's going to fail the build until I change the build definition so that it can build my code. But I can't do that because other pull requests are going through right now who need the old build definition. Right? So it's like, oh my God, how do I get my code into here without all these other people behind me or in front of me needing the old build? Well, what you do is you put your build definition in your repo. Now, all the repos can actually have a completely different build, but they're all going to work because the build is defined in the repo, not outside of the repo. And that's when the light came on from like, now I see the value of having a YAML build in my repo, is that my pull request is now going to succeed, even if my build is different than the last push to that repository.
Yeah, that's a time-tested principle. I remember talking about that when extreme programming was really part of the conversation. If it's not stored in the source control repository, it's not branchable. You may want to go back in time and do a hot fix for production and go back to what produced that production build. But if you don't have everything at that point in time, then something's going to surprise you.
Yep. And in a bad way. I completely agree. I remember that goes back to where we used to actually store our DLLs and dependencies in source control for that very reason, right? Because if we have to go back and do a hotfix, I can't go trying to find that version of whatever tool set we were using from a decade ago or a year ago and hope that I can get it on our build machine. It needs to be in source control so I can do a get latest and build. And like you're right, that extends to the actual build definition itself.
Right.
Otherwise, the build definition today might not build the code from 4 commits ago, right? Yeah. And we can't go back and do a hotfix.
So something simple as I renamed the in-unit test project.
Yep.
I mean, that right there, that's...
Yep, could break your build. Mm-hmm. Yep. Unless you're trying to use some type of generics or min match, which a lot of us are doing too, but that can also bite you in the butt because sometimes you match more than you thought you would, right? So it's tricky.
So YAML stands for YAML ain't a markup language, interestingly enough. But when you have this...
I thought it was yet another markup language.
Well, then the internet disagrees with itself. But
okay, then maybe I'm the one that's wrong. I thought it was yet another markup language, but ain't another markup language. I guess either one of them works from the acronym.
Very meta. So when you have this YAML build configuration, what you can define it in steps, and then you convert. Then what's next? How do the developers manage it afterwards?
Well, it's just another file in your repository. So when you clone your repository, you'll actually see the YAML file right there. You'll be able to bring it up in Visual Studio Code or your editor of choice. Most of them now have really good plugins for YAML because you got to be careful with YAML. You put too many spaces or a tab where it's meant to space, the whole thing will come crumbling down around you. So make sure you choose a good editor that'll allow you to edit the file safely and make sure that you conform to all of the standards required. And then you just commit it like you would any other change that to your process. And what's really nice about them as well is most of them support running your build locally on your machine before you push it to your actual repository to verify that you have your YAML build. Because a lot of us have been through that world where trying to modify a build definition can be a very painful process. You commit the code, the build runs, it fails. You make a change to your build definition, you queue it again, and it fails. And it's just this nightmare experience of modifying it, waiting for the agent to come out of queue, build your build just to fail, just to go back. Right. But now you can have that inner loop right there on your dev machine. Modify the YAML file, be able to go back into the file very quickly, run it, and then right there locally on your machine and verify that it's going to work. And then when you commit it, it should run the exact same way.
Yeah, that's awesome. You can have your private build. So packages has changed quite a bit, and maybe the listeners don't know everything that's available in DevOps for packages.
Yeah, the packages allow you to do NPM, you can do Maven, and you can do NuGet, which is kind of cool. And what a lot of people aren't aware of is NuGet is the same delivery mechanism used for PowerShell. So if you're doing PowerShell modules, DSC module, things like that, it's just NuGet. So you can actually do development for NPM, Maven, NuGet, and PowerShell and actually deploy inside of the package management that's built inside of Azure DevOps, which is really nice. And I've been working on that for quite some time. I've been writing more and more PowerShell. And what I was finding a lack of was good documentation on what is the reference architecture pipeline for a package.
Yeah.
I want to use all the DevOps best practices I know and love from all my other types of development,
Right.
but I want to apply it to packages instead. And I've been spending a lot of time on that because VS Team, one of the open source projects that I support, is a PowerShell module. And I got tired of every time I got a pull request having to figure out how to deploy that manually and going to the command line and running these PowerShell commands to publish it to the PowerShell gallery. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm a DevOps guy. This is not how I deploy software.
Right.
I don't care if it's a package or not. There has to be a better way. And using VSTS back then, now Azure DevOps, and the package management support, I came up with a really good flow that I'm going to start documenting now where I just commit my changes to a repository. It then takes my PowerShell module, runs static code analysis against it. It runs unit testing. It does code coverage. It then takes those files and publishes them out as an artifact. When we get into the release phase of our deployment, it downloads those artifacts, packages them as a NuGet file, and then stuffs them inside of our internal package management. The reason that I do that is I learned the hard way that when you do unit tests on loose files that weren't actually installed from a module, they can sometimes behave differently when you actually install the module because you forgot to add a file to the manifest, you forgot to do a casing issue when you're running on Mac, Windows, or Linux, and things just don't operate the same way as they did when they were just files on your hard drive. So what's really important is part of our deployment is you store it inside of an actual feed, which is the private feed that no one can see. Mm-hmm. And then the next stage of your release, you install it from that feed as you would as a normal user. It makes sure that all your dependencies are properly defined. It was really cool once. I added a dependency to a project, forgot to register it correctly, and my release system failed. It said, I installed this, but I can't run this commandlet because the dependency isn't there. I'm like, what's going on? Holy mackerel, I forgot to define that. And had I pushed that out into production, all our customers would have been broken. But yeah. Exactly. But I was able to go back, fix my reference, run my pipeline again. It installed it into the feed, and it installed it into the feed by pushing it, and then installed it from the feed again, and all my dependencies resolved, and I knew that that package was now ready to rock and roll. We ran a battery of integration tests, which is completely automated. And then at the end of it, it says, okay, Donovan, I've tested everything. I've installed it from the feed. Do you want me to push this to PowerShell or not? And I give it an approval. Next thing I know, that package is now inside of the PowerShell gallery, ready for all our customers to use.
You know, that's a good point because people who've done desktop software, they understand what it means to have an installer that runs on a computer that you don't control. Well, when you publish a NuGet package, that installer, however simple the mechanism is going to run on a computer that you don't control.
Exactly. And and I got burned a couple of times. And one of the things I do also when the build definition for the PowerShell modules runs the unit test on Mac, Windows, and Linux. Reason why is because casing means nothing on Windows, but it will kill you on Mac and Linux. And that's exactly what happened to me. Again, I learned the hard way. Everything was working great. I dev on a Windows machine. I push a new version of my PowerShell module into the PowerShell gallery, and all of a sudden I go to my Mac, I install the module, and it doesn't work. And I realized I literally had one file cased incorrectly. Right. And I was like, oh my goodness, I gotta test this before I push to production. So now our build runs on Mac, Windows, and Linux to verify there's no casing issues in your logic. And then when it installs it from the gallery, it installs it on Mac, Windows, and Linux and tests it against TFS 2017, 18, and VSTS. So that I know by the time it's ready to go into the PowerShell gallery, I've tested it on every platform that we support. I've run all the tests, and I have no casing issues. And it's so nice because it's literally just I commit the code, and if I get a notification, I know everything is good for me to go into production.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it because I hadn't seen a really good write-up of it, and it's taken me probably a year I've been working on this because the first few that I got to work, you kind of looked at it like, yeah, you got it to work, but that's not really pretty, right? You got it to work, but you really wouldn't want to tell your customers to do that. And now I think I have something like, wow, I would tell our customers to do this. This is really clean. It's really efficient. It doesn't touch any of the zeros and ones, so that what I'm testing is what I'm deploying. It's versioned correctly. It really feels good. And I showed it to a couple of my peers recently, and I got the nod from all of them, like, Donovan, this is good stuff. You need to go document this. So
Definitely.
That's what I'll be working on here soon.
And there's so many examples that people, yourself and others, they figure out the right formula for building a certain type of application or library. Sure. And I know this feature, I think, came out earlier in the summer, public repository or public projects within the system. But it'd be interesting to see if we start to have a sort of an open source pipeline listing come out so that people can learn what sequence of steps works in different scenarios.
And actually, that did come out. So right now, if you have a GitHub repository who's being built by Azure Pipelines, you can actually put a badge on your README file such that it'll show you if the build passes or fails. And even if an anonymous person clicks that link, they will see the build results and the build summary and the build flow and the release as well, right? So that's new as well.
Cool.
But you can't support GitHub without having that, because in the past, we could build from GitHub, but if you clicked on that link, you would get challenged for an authentication, and you couldn't authenticate. So even if your pull request failed, you couldn't see why it failed, right? You couldn't go take any corrective action. So it's like, interesting. It's kind of works, but it's kind of rough, because unless you are the person with authority inside that particular account, you can't see why it failed. So now giving this anonymous access to the build and the release allows people who are committing pull requests to see why their pull request might have been rejected or failed, and get a better understanding of where they need to go make changes in their pull request. And to your point, it allows people just to learn like other ways of using. I might not be a contributor to your project, but I'm really interested in how you're doing DevOps for your PowerShell module. I can now go review your steps and look at the anatomy of your release, and then try to duplicate that myself. Yeah. And as YAML becomes more relevant from the VSTS or the Azure DevOps perspective, then it's even going to be easier, because you won't even have to go click the link. It's literally the file is in the repo, right? And that's what you need to go and look at. And
you mentioned GitHub. Microsoft is giving free build capability to open source projects, right?
Yep. 10 free concurrent pipelines, which is more, and unlimited minutes, which is not what you get for anything other that's not public. So if it's a public project, and you can be public project using GitHub or our own Git repository, we're going to give you unlimited private build hours and minutes, and you can run 10 concurrent pipelines, which is a lot of concurrent pipelines running at once. And you can have it thanks to being a public project. Again, we're trying to make sure people understand that Microsoft is here to support open source. It's a new age for us here at Microsoft.
That's huge. Some number of years ago, a lot of .NET-based open source projects jumped on the JetBrains TeamCity community server until the server failed, and it lost just tons and tons of data, and everyone realized, oh, okay, this was just a server on a VM hosted somewhere, and then it failed, and there was data lost. But now this is the world-class service that and it's free. For anyone's open source project. That's insane.
Every time I say it too, it kind of like, really? Like, yeah, that's what I said, and that's the facts. It's like, oh, that's awesome.
Right.
It's different, but it's awesome.
You know what I'm excited about? Here in Austin, Texas, we support a local high school, and there's a computer science teacher that's just really awesome at Lake Travis High School, and this means that any one of those high school students could put some code up on GitHub, configure Azure DevOps services, and now they have a professional enterprise-grade environment for free.
That is exactly. And what I love about that is I played sports when I was younger, and I was always told, you play how you practice, right? Like how you play at practice is how you're going to play on the field. And historically, the tools you used at work were so expensive. There weren't the tools you used at home as a hobbyist developer.
Yeah.
And you didn't have that same muscle memory. You'd have to do things differently. But now you can actually have Azure DevOps at home. It's the same product you use at work, right? So you're going to be able to build that muscle memory, and you're going to be able to play how you practice, because it doesn't matter. You put it in GitHub, it's open source. And even if you don't, you can still, there's a small limit that you get for free anyway. So you can play how you practice, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, open source projects, we're just opening the gates and saying, just go do great stuff.
That is awesome. One of the, I think you mentioned it briefly, an unbreakable pipeline. Is there any more information that you want to share with the listeners about that?
Sure. So the concept of an unbreakable pipeline comes from Dynatrace. I was doing a couple podcasts with them, and one of the guests the host was describing this to me, and he could hear through the phone how big I was smiling. Like, okay, this sounds awesome. And I had him stop talking. I was like, hold on, I need you to stop talking. And then I went and grabbed one of my teammates, like, Abel, you have to come hear this. What these guys are talking about is crazy cool. He's like, all right, hold on. So he jumps on the call. And then in the back channel, Abel and I are IMing each other. He's like, holy crap. Like, I told you, man, this stuff is awesome. And what it is, it's like you said earlier, everything has to be inside of your source control, like everything. But monitoring today isn't. Right? A lot of us don't put our monitoring configuration and definition inside of our repository. It's an external system where we go and we turn all these dials and knobs, we set all of our thresholds, and then a human being monitors that to see if our application is healthy or not. What if, on the other hand, you're actually able to define in code what you wanted to monitor and what the thresholds that you wanted to be monitored were, and actually commit that to your source control repository.
Yes.
Then, as your code starts to run through the pipeline, you evaluate those thresholds, compare them to what they used to be, see if you've gotten better or worse, and actually stop your pipeline based on actual numbers and not someone's gut feel or someone's review of the board, but literally, no, you told me to look at these numbers, and I'm telling you these numbers are worse than the numbers that I recorded on the previous version of your software. You do not want this to go forward anymore. Or God forbid, you push it into production, and now I see you're getting a lot of server errors. I can now actively roll that system back to the previously known good build. So it's literally an unbreakable pipeline, is the fact that the pipeline, given the information that it needs to monitor, will literally roll itself back to the previous version that was working without any human intervention is needed.
And what's the status of that capability?
Well, it's cool. So the unbreakable pipeline, they have a working demo from it with Dynatrace, but when they showed it to me, it was using all of our competitors' products. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, no, first of all, not only do I think that we can do this, I think some of the features that are built inside of our release management product actually make doing this easier than what I just saw you doing, because we have this thing called a release gate. And a release gate can run on a timer automatically, like every 3 minutes. I want you to go and check this particular information. So what I did is I said, all right, Abel, this is your new task. I want you to go take what we just saw, and I want you to put it inside of the Microsoft ecosystem using Dynatrace as the monitoring framework. So what we did is just that. So Abel spent a couple weeks, sat down, learned everything there was to learn about the what they call a monspec file, which is the file you put inside of your repository, concepts of the unbreakable pipeline, and what features of Microsoft we could use Azure Functions and the release gates and turn this into a reality using back then what was VSTS. And Abel did. And he wrote these extensions, and we've handed those extensions now over to Dynatrace, who are now in control of those and are maintaining those for us. But we have an entire unbreakable pipeline concept built entirely on our Azure DevOps framing.
That is awesome.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, and Abel wrote a blog post about it, and I can send you some links if you want for the show notes of that particular. Yeah, it's an incredible blog post, and it really shines the light on how powerful what we have here at Microsoft really is. And we could do it with Dynatrace as we've done in the past. We could do it with Application Insights. It's now a pluggable, unbreakable pipeline, letting you go anywhere that you want using any monitoring that you want.
Cool. Yeah, that's the feedback loop in DevOps, is actually watching how your system is running in production, getting that information, funneling it back, and learning from it so that it flows back into planning for the next code changes.
I could not have said it better myself. That is exactly the point, right? You have to monitor yourself running in production. If you don't even know if you delivered value or not, right? You just did the number one thing on your product backlog. You just assume that's valuable because this was number one. You push it out into production, but if you don't monitor it, you don't know if that was number one or not, or if your customers are even using it or not. Right. And monitoring isn't just, is the site up or not, but are they actually yielding value from what it is we just pushed out into production? Right? And a lot of people aren't doing that. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's crucial that you do. That way, when you make an investment in your pipeline, you can measure if it was a good investment or not.
Yeah, well said. Well, as we wrap up, what should our listeners do next?
That's That's a good question. One of the things I would encourage them to do, especially if they want to learn more about what we're doing here at Microsoft, is docs.microsoft.com has become this amazing hub for all the information that you want on all the products that we produce, not just what we're doing with Azure, but what we're doing with PowerShell and all of our suites of things here at Microsoft. So docs.microsoft.com is a great place to go. And then obviously you can, if you have a DevOps specific question, my team, which has been nicknamed The League, has a hashtag. So if you use a hashtag LOECDA in any tweet that you have, it literally lights up a team room. We joke that it's our bat signal. If you use it, 5 of us will come and read your tweet and figure out if we know the answers or who in Microsoft knows the answers and get your answers, your questions answered for you. So we're really, really active on Twitter. So I'd encourage you to engage the league and the whole CDA organization on Twitter so that we can come and help you there. Docs.microsoft.com. Channel 9 is another great resource as well. There's a lot of good content there with the DevOps Lab show, DevOps interviews, and Azure Friday, which are great shows about DevOps and the cloud that are available for you on Channel 9 as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Donovan, for visiting with me. It was fun.
My pleasure. No, it was a pleasure being here. And anytime you want me back, just let me know.
Awesome. And until next week, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.